They say the past never really dies. It just waits for someone brave enough to uncover it. Sometimes it hides in bloodlines and forgotten letters. Sometimes in secrets buried beneath wealth and silence. And sometimes it hides in something so small, so ordinary, you'd never guess it could change a life. For Sarah Jenkins, a single mother scraping by in a fading town, the past wasn't something she had time to think about. Her world was measured in coffee cups and unpaid bills and the hum of a diner that never quite filled with customers anymore. But one morning, she'd inherit something she didn't ask for, a rusty old pocket watch. And with it, a mystery that would unravel a dynasty, rewrite her family's history, and test the one thing she'd never lost, her heart. Before we begin, take a moment, hit that subscribe button, and tell me where you're listening from tonight. Because this story, this one, is about what we all inherit when the world leaves us behind. Now sit back, and let's begin.
The morning light hit the chrome coffee machine in the same tired way it always did, a dull reflection over a nearly empty diner. Jenkins' Diner, the faded sign out front read, the J half burnt out for years. Inside, the tables were clean but lonely. A few regulars sat scattered, sipping coffee and staring through their own silences. Behind the counter, Sarah Jenkins poured another cup for Mr. Keating, a retired bus driver who had eaten the same breakfast here for 15 years. He smiled out of habit more than warmth. "You ever think about selling this place, Sarah?" She forced a small smile. "Sell what exactly? The charm, the debt, or the smell of burnt bacon?" He chuckled softly. "Just don't want to see you run yourself into the ground, that's all." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The bell above the door jingled. Not a customer, just a delivery man dropping off a few boxes of supplies she could barely afford. The register drawer clanged open, revealing a handful of bills, not enough for next week's gas bill. By the time the lunch rush came, which meant 5 people instead of 3, Sarah's feet ached, her hands smelled of grease, and the worry that never left her chest had settled in deeper. Outside, the wind picked up, the kind that felt like a warning of change, or maybe just another storm. When she closed up that night, her son was already waiting upstairs. Leo, 14, all heart and restless brilliance, sat cross-legged at the kitchen table, surrounded by scraps of wire and metal. He was building something, again, a makeshift science project for school maybe. "Careful with those circuits," she said gently. "Last time you blew a fuse, I had to cook by candlelight." He grinned. "I'm being careful. It's for the Caltech program. I finished the essay, but the tuitions—" He hesitated. Sarah knew what he wasn't saying. The tuition was more than their diner made in 3 months. She smiled anyway. "You just keep building. I'll figure out the rest." He gave her a look, that quiet, trusting look that only a kid still believes in. "You always do," he said. Later, when he fell asleep on the couch, Sarah sat alone in the soft hum of the fridge. She stared at the pile of unpaid bills on the table and whispered to herself, "I'll figure it out." But the truth was, she didn't know how. The next morning, she received a letter. An embossed envelope addressed to Miss Sarah Jenkins, beneficiary of the Vance estate. Her breath caught at that name, Vance. It had been years, decades, since she'd heard it spoken aloud. Her mother's maiden name. Her mother, who died believing her father, Sarah's grandfather, had wanted nothing to do with them. The letter was short and formal. "You are requested to attend the reading of the last will and testament of Elias Vance, deceased." She stared at it for a long time. Her hands trembled slightly, not from grief, but confusion. She had never met Elias Vance. The man had been a ghost her entire life. The law office was everything she wasn't. Polished wood, expensive pens, people who didn't have to check price tags. Her cousin, Vivian Vance, was already there, dressed like wealth itself, impeccable posture, a face that smiled without warmth. "Sarah," Vivian said in a tone that managed to be both polite and cutting. "Didn't think you'd come." Sarah forced a thin smile. "Neither did I." The lawyer, Mr. Whitby, an older man with a voice like gravel wrapped in velvet, adjusted his glasses and began reading. "To my granddaughter Vivian, I leave the Vance estate, holdings and associated assets." Vivian's smile grew. "To my other granddaughter, Sarah Jenkins." Sarah leaned forward, her breath shallow. "I leave a keepsake of sentimental value, an heirloom symbolic of time and legacy." Mr. Whitby lifted a small velvet box and slid it toward her. Inside, resting on a piece of black felt, was a rusted, broken pocket watch. For a moment, she thought it was a mistake. Then she saw the faint engraving on the back, E.V. Vivian's smirk returned. "How fitting." Sarah's voice was low. "That's it?" Mr. Whitby's expression didn't change. Mr. Vance's wishes were quite clear. As she closed the box, the lawyer added, almost idly, "Perhaps sentimental items suit sentimental people." Her face burned. She wanted to throw the watch at the wall. Instead, she stood, nodded once, and left without another word. Outside, the city glared bright and cold. She clutched the box in her hand until her knuckles whitened. "Legacy," she whispered bitterly. "Right." That night, she placed the watch in the kitchen drawer, the same one filled with receipts, broken pens, and old batteries. It landed with a dull metallic clink. "Some inheritance," she muttered. She checked on Leo, who was still awake, poring over a book of mechanical designs. When she told him about the will, he didn't react with anger, only quiet thought. "Maybe it means something," he said. "It means I got mocked by a dead man," she replied. He smiled faintly. "Or maybe he was just bad at picking gifts." She ruffled his hair. "Go to sleep, genius." When she turned off the kitchen light, the room fell into shadow, except for the faintest glint from inside the drawer, where the watch's cracked glass caught the moonlight. The diner was emptier than usual. Rain pounded the windows. The roof leaked again. Sarah fixed coffee, staring absently at the clock on the wall. 10 minutes slow, just like the one in her pocket. Then Leo burst in from the apartment upstairs, his voice bright with excitement. "Mom, you need to see this." He held out the rusty pocket watch. "It's not broken." She frowned. "Leo, Look," he said, opening the back carefully. "See that engraving? It's not just initials. There's a number, 5340. And this part here, it says P.O. Box 77 S/F. He handed her the magnifying glass he used for his circuits. Sure enough, beneath the corrosion, there it was, tiny, perfect script etched into the brass. "San Francisco," she whispered. He nodded. "Maybe it's a bank box or a message." She sighed. "Even if it is, what difference would it make?" He smiled. "You'll never know if you don't check." That night, she sat alone at the diner counter, flipping the watch open and closed. Each tick, faint, uneven, sounded like a dare. By morning, she made up her mind. She borrowed a friend's old car, packed Leo's backpack, and scrawled a note on the diner register. Back in a few days. Don't close up on me yet." As they pulled onto the highway, the world outside the windshield felt wide again, almost like it used to when she was younger, before debt and disappointment narrowed it. Leo stared out at the passing miles. "Do you think he left us something real, Mom?" She looked at the watch ticking faintly between them. "I don't know," she said softly, "but we'll find out." The old watch ticked once more, steady, sure, as the car disappeared down the road toward San Francisco.
The highway curved along the northern coast, the ocean misting faint against the car windows. Sarah drove with both hands tight on the wheel, her eyes fixed forward, jaws set in quiet determination. Beside her, Leo sat in the passenger seat with the watch cradled in his hands like it was something fragile and alive. The radio played static between stations. Somewhere past the cliffs, waves crashed against rock, relentless, rhythmic, ancient. For hours, neither of them spoke. Finally, Leo broke the silence. "Do you think he meant for us to find it?" Sarah didn't look away from the road. "I think he meant for me to stop looking before I ever found anything." Leo smiled faintly. "Then maybe I wasn't part of the plan." She glanced at him then, the corner of her mouth lifting despite herself. "You've never been part of anyone's plan. That's your gift." They drove until the sun rose higher over the hills, until the signs changed from rural route numbers to city exits. San Francisco, 27 miles. San Francisco looked nothing like she remembered from a childhood trip decades ago. The skyline had sharpened into glass and steel. Even the air smelled different, newer, colder. They parked near a narrow downtown street lined with small shops and old post boxes, relics of another era. The P.O. Box address was burned into Sarah's mind, P.O. Box 77. The postal clerk, a woman in her 60s with gray hair tied in a bun, looked surprised when Sarah handed her the yellowed slip of paper. "Box 77?" she repeated. "That's been sealed for, goodness, at least 40 years." Sarah hesitated. "I'm listed as an inheritor of the estate of Elias Vance." The woman's eyes flickered. Recognition, maybe. Or memory. "Vance," she said softly. "Well, that name carries history." She disappeared into the back room. When she returned, she was holding a small, aged envelope, sealed with wax that had long since cracked. Sarah reached out, but the woman didn't hand it over immediately. "You know, when I started here, we were told never to discard this box. Said the owner prepaid rent indefinitely. I guess now we know why." The envelope was light, almost empty. Inside was a single silver dollar, gleaming even through decades of dust, and a folded slip of paper. Sarah opened it. The handwriting was sharp and deliberate. 1932. The first principle. Keep what is built, guard what is owed. Leo leaned over her shoulder. "That's not much of a clue." Sarah frowned. "Maybe it's not a clue. Maybe it's a warning." They took a booth at a small coffee shop across the street. The silver coin sat between them on a napkin. It was old, the edges worn smooth, but on the face, faint letters gleamed. Vance Holdings. Leo turned it over and over again, studying it like a puzzle. "Mom, did he own a company?" Sarah shrugged. "If he did, it wasn't one that wanted us around." A voice interrupted them. "Actually," it said, "he owned several." They looked up. A woman stood beside their table. Early 30s, dark hair, crisp but approachable in tone. She carried a leather satchel and wore the kind of polite smile that came with secrets. "I'm sorry," she said, extending a card. "My name is Nora Bennett. I think we need to talk."
Nora was not like the lawyer who'd read the will. She didn't speak in condescension or hide behind legal phrases. She spoke like someone chasing truth. Over coffee, she explained how she came to find him. "I'm not technically a lawyer," she admitted, "more of an archivist. I work with historical estates, And Elias Vance's name, well, it doesn't stay buried easily. Sarah folded her arms. You think he left me more than a watch and a joke? Nora smiled faintly. I think he left you the key to everything he spent his life hiding. She laid out a few old photos on the table, black and white, sepia-toned. One of a man standing beside a massive building with the sign, Vance Industries, above it. Another of a bank document, dated 1932, with a stamped seal, the First Principal Fund. Leo leaned forward. What's the first principle? Nora traced the words with a finger. It's not a phrase, it's a philosophy. Elias used it in every one of his writings. It meant that wealth should never exist without purpose, that whoever owned something had a responsibility to protect it. Sarah frowned. Then why leave it to people like Vivian? Nora met her eyes. Because he didn't. They followed Nora back to her office, a small space lined with shelves of books and boxes of estate files. Dusty ledgers, maps, and fragments of correspondence lay spread across the desk. I've spent months going through what's left of the Vance archives. Most of it was redacted by their corporate partners, but what I did find. She handed Sarah a file labeled Principal Accounts, 1932. Inside was a single balance sheet showing staggering amounts of assets, all listed as unclaimed. Sarah blinked. Unclaimed? Nora nodded. Technically, they were never registered under anyone's name. Elias created a system to protect them, one that modern databases can't trace. And I think your watch was his fail-safe, the physical key to unlocking those accounts. Leo's eyes went wide. You mean the numbers engraved on it? Might be the combination to the original vault, if it still exists. Sarah exhaled slowly, leaning back. This is insane. I run a diner that barely pays rent, and you telling me my grandfather may have left behind a hidden empire? Nora gave a small, patient smile. He didn't leave it behind, Miss Jenkins. He left it in trust, and the trust was always meant for you. That night, in a small hotel near the pier, Sarah couldn't sleep. The city lights painted lines of gold across the ceiling. She sat at the small table, turning the silver dollar over in her hands. The inscription on the edge caught her eye again, faint but unmistakable. Keep what is built. Guard what is owed. She whispered the words aloud, as if saying them might unlock something. Her grandfather's name, once meaningless, now hung in her mind like a riddle that wouldn't fade. Leo stirred on the other bed. Mom? Couldn't sleep either? She asked softly. He shook his head. What if it's not about money? She looked at him. Then what is it? Maybe it's about what he believed in. Maybe he wanted to see if we would too. Sarah smiled faintly. You think he left me a test? She shrugged. You the one who always says life's just one big exam. They laughed quietly, and for the first time in weeks, she felt lighter. Outside, the fog rolled in off the bay, thick and slow, swallowing the world beyond the window. Somewhere out there, in the sprawl of the city, another clue waited, hidden by a man who had trusted time more than people.
The next morning, they met Nora at the Historical Records Building. Nora's excitement was restrained but unmistakable. I traced the bank accounts associated with the phrase First Principal. The name appears again in 1963, under a shell company called Vanguard Property Trust. She laid out a photograph of a small brick building that looked abandoned. Leo squinted. That address looks familiar. Sarah frowned. It should. It's across from where your great-grandfather's factory used to be. Nora nodded. Exactly. The factory's gone, but the trust building's still there. And here's where it gets strange. No one's paid taxes on it in 60 years, but it's never been foreclosed. Almost like someone wanted it frozen in time. They drove out there just before sunset. The building stood wedged between two newer ones, a forgotten relic of another century. The glass was clouded, the front door chained shut. Leo tugged on the chain and found a small plate underneath, Vance Archive. Sarah ran her hand over it. The metal was cold, real. "Whatever this is," Nora said softly, "it's not over." Inside the car, Sarah looked at the watch, ticking faintly on the dashboard. For the first time, she felt something shift. Not hope exactly, but purpose. She turned to Leo. "Pack up your things. We're staying here a few more days." He grinned. "Does that mean we're treasure hunters now?" She laughed quietly. "No, it means we're family historians, with bad timing." Outside, the last of the sun disappeared behind the skyline, turning the glass of the city gold. Sarah held the silver coin up to the light, and for a brief moment, the engraved crest reflected perfectly over her face, aligning with her own reflection in the window. She didn't know it yet, but that moment, that faint shimmer of connection between past and present, was the first sign that her life, her name, and her bloodline were about to change forever. Because buried inside that coin, and within the ticking of that rusted watch, was the beginning of a billion-dollar secret waiting to awaken. The next morning began with fog thick as smoke over the bay. The streets were empty except for the distant sound of a streetcar and the whisper of rain on old rooftops. Sarah stood outside the abandoned brick building that bore her family's name, Vance Archive. Beside her, Leo shivered inside his hoodie, excitement barely contained behind his sleepy eyes. "Still think this is a waste of time?" he asked. Sarah looked at the rusted padlock on the door. "I think I've spent 40 years running from things I didn't understand. Maybe it's time I stopped." Nora arrived moments later, carrying a small crowbar and a folder under her arm. "Officially," she said, "we're not breaking in. We're reclaiming." Sarah gave a tired smile. "Call it whatever lets you sleep tonight." The door gave way with a low, metallic groan. Inside, dust hung in the air like suspended time. The smell of oil, paper, and something older, the scent of age itself. Rows of filing cabinets stretched into the dark. Broken lamps. Faded photographs on the wall. Men in suits shaking hands under the words Vance Industries, 1932. Leo's flashlight landed on a steel vault door at the far end of the room. "Mom, look." On the door's surface was an engraving, worn but still legible. "The First Principle." Underneath it, in smaller letters, "Ownership through Stewardship." Nora exhaled. "That's it. This is the origin." Sarah approached the door. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the steel. She felt small, uninvited, but also drawn. "How do we open it?" she asked. Nora lifted the pocket watch. "The engravings, the numbers on the back, they match old combination formats used for vaults in the 1930s. She turned the dials carefully. 5, 3, 4, 0. Then pressed the central latch. A hiss filled the air, followed by a slow, heavy click. The door swung open. Inside, rows of ledgers lined the walls. Meticulous handwriting, balances, transactions, all marked with a strange seal that read VFP, Vance Financial Principle. Leo ran his fingers over the spines. "It's like an old database." Nora nodded. This is the prototype of what became one of the largest hidden funds in history. Sarah opened one of the ledgers. Each page listed deposits from famous companies: Ford, Standard Oil, early defense contractors, all routed through the same holding firm. It's billions, maybe trillions now. But the deeper she read, the less it felt like greed, and the more it felt like guilt. In the margins of several pages were handwritten notes, Elias's private annotations. They wanted to collapse it. I refused. I built it for stability, not control. If they find my bloodline, they'll use it as a claim, so I will erase them from record. Sarah froze. Erase them? Meaning us? Her throat went dry. He hadn't abandoned them. He'd buried them to keep them safe.
They spent hours combing through the room. In one corner, Leo discovered a locked chest. Inside were several leather-bound journals, the ink faded but still legible. The first entry was dated January 3, 1932. Markets are drowning. Men are selling land, blood, and conscience for scraps. I built the first principle to protect what remains. One day, someone will need to understand what we built here. I pray it's someone with patience enough to listen. Sarah's eyes lingered on that last line. Patience. The same virtue she'd mocked when she first held the broken watch. She flipped to another entry, written decades later, the pen shakier, but the mind still sharp. My daughter thinks me cruel. She sees absence as hatred. I have no words to tell her that love sometimes hides itself to survive. I will leave the watch to her child, if that child still believes in fixing what is broken. Her breath caught. He had written it for her. Hours later, as rain pattered on the cracked windows, Sarah sat alone, surrounded by her grandfather's words. She thought of her mother, the woman who'd lived and died thinking she'd been cast out. She thought of herself, years spent working double shifts, believing she'd been forgotten by the world. And now here she was, reading proof that she'd never been forgotten at all. Leo approached quietly, carrying one of the journals. Mom, he said softly, listen to this. He read aloud. Wealth corrupts when it loses its story. The first principle isn't money. It's the belief that what is built must serve more than those who built it. Sarah closed her eyes. He didn't build an empire. He built a promise. They spent the night at a small motel off the highway, the journals spread out across the table like puzzle pieces. In one of the later entries, Nora noticed a reference to Vault 2, Western Annex. Leo's eyes widened. You think there's another one? Nora smiled. Elias Vance didn't do anything halfway. If there's an annex, there's more. The coordinates written beside it led to a remote area in the Nevada desert. 2 days later, under a blistering sky, the three of them arrived at a stretch of cracked earth surrounded by rusted fences and warning signs. Restricted area, private research facility. The gate creaked open with a shove. Beyond it, a long concrete building stretched half buried into the hillside. Inside, the air was cool and still. Generators hummed softly, light flickered on, and what they saw next stole the breath from their lungs. Rows upon rows of steel shelves filled the cavernous space, each holding crates labeled Property of Vance Holdings, 1932 to 1969. Nora whispered, He preserved everything. Inside the crates were original patent documents, gold certificates,
invention blueprints, early prototypes of technologies that would go on to change the modern world. Leo picked up a dusty object from a table, a mechanical computing device no bigger than a shoebox. "This is pre-transistor," he said in awe. "This could have rewritten computer history." Sarah looked around, feeling a dizzy mix of wonder and sorrow. Her grandfather hadn't just hidden wealth, he'd hidden innovation. Deeper in the facility, in a sealed glass chamber, they found the final journal, newer than the rest, bound in dark leather. On the first page, Elias's handwriting was still steady. "If you found this, then you have earned it." The watch was not a test of intelligence, but of character. The world will always have those who see value only in shine. But you, my blood, you saw value in ruin. You fixed what others threw away. That is the true inheritance. Sarah's hand shook as she read. "Do not claim this fortune as ownership. Use it as stewardship. Let it serve the ones who will never be invited into the boardrooms or remembered in the ledgers. They are the true shareholders." Tears blurred the ink. Leo rested his head against her shoulder. "He believed in you, Mom, before you even knew it." She smiled through tears. "Maybe he believed in you, too."
They weren't alone for long. When they returned to the surface, 2 black cars waited outside. Vivian stood beside them, her polished heels sinking into the desert dust. "Well," she said coolly, "I see the rumors were true." Sarah's heart pounded. "You followed us?" Vivian's smirk didn't falter. "This property belongs to the estate, and as the legal inheritor—" Nora cut her off, holding up one of the journals. "Actually, it doesn't. The estate was dissolved upon discovery of these documents. According to Elias Vance's encoded trust, ownership passes only to the descendant who fulfills the first principle." Vivian's eyes darkened. "And what's that supposed to mean?" Sarah's voice was calm now. "It means you can't inherit what you don't understand." That night, back at the motel, Sarah read one last journal entry aloud. "To the one who carries my name forward, do not repeat my silence. Build something that gives. Build something that forgives. I could not be a father to your mother, but I can be a foundation to you." Sarah closed the book, tears streaking her cheeks. Leo reached for her hand. "What will you do with it, Mom?" She smiled faintly, exactly what he hoped I would. Outside, the desert sky stretched endless, and for the first time in her life, Sarah felt free. Not because of the money, but because the story had finally been told. The clock she once threw away had given her time back, time to heal, time to rebuild, time to become something more. And somewhere in the quiet hum of the night, the rusty old watch on the table ticked softly, not as a reminder of the past, but as a promise of the future.
The sun was just beginning to rise over the Nevada desert when Sarah Jenkins finally stepped out of the facility that had changed everything. The air was cool and dry, the horizon painted in streaks of gold and soft blue. Behind her, the massive concrete vaults of the Vance archive seemed to hum faintly, as if the walls themselves were breathing after decades of silence. She held the old watch in her palm. It was still ticking, steady now, as though it had been waiting for this moment to come back to life. Leo stood beside her, eyes full of awe and quiet pride. "What happens now?" Sarah smiled softly. "Now, we make it right." 2 months later, the courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and paperwork. The case of Vance Estate versus Jenkins had drawn reporters, historians, and legal scholars alike. The mystery of the first principal fund had finally come into the open, and so had the question of who it truly belonged to. Vivian Vance sat across the aisle, flanked by her lawyers, her face perfectly composed. She had every advantage: wealth, status, and a lifetime of entitlement. Sarah had none of that. Just Nora Bennett, her lawyer-turned-friend, and the journals of Elias Vance, bound together with a leather strap. The judge, a man with a deep voice and deliberate manner, flipped through the documents before him. He looked over his glasses at Sarah. "Miss Jenkins, do you understand that the discovery of this trust could shift financial control over a multinational holding structure?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And you still wish to claim stewardship under this first principle clause?" "I don't claim it. I was chosen for it." Vivian's lawyer rose immediately. "Your Honor, that is a sentimental interpretation of an outdated concept. The wealth in question belongs to the legal successor of the Vance estate, which is—" Nora stood, interrupting him. "Which is no longer relevant. The original trust dissolves all claims not rooted in stewardship. Elias Vance wrote that inheritance was not a right, but a responsibility, and Miss Jenkins has fulfilled that responsibility by recovering, preserving, and protecting the assets in question." The courtroom fell silent. The judge adjusted his glasses again and turned a page. In front of him lay the final journal entry, Elias's farewell to his granddaughter. He read aloud, "To the one who carries my blood and my burden. If you are reading this, you have already proven that wealth is safest in the hands of those who know how to rebuild. You were tested not by what I gave you, but by what you refused to throw away." He closed the book gently. Then he looked up at Sarah, a single mother, in a simple blouse and tired eyes, sitting with her hands folded in her lap. "Miss Jenkins," he said slowly, "it would appear that your grandfather left you more than property. He left you purpose, and this court sees no reason to deny you what you've already preserved." Vivian's face went pale. The judge continued, "The Vance Fund shall be transferred under the stewardship of Miss Sarah Jenkins as executor of the first principle." The gavel came down once, echoing through the room like the final tick of a long-forgotten clock.
6 months later, the Vance Foundation was born, not as a bank, not as a corporation, but as a living promise. Sarah reopened the diner, but this time it wasn't just hers. The building gleamed with new paint and warmth, the sign outside reading, "Jenkins and Vance Cafe, a place to begin again." The tables were filled now, families, travelers, people who'd heard the story of the watch lady and wanted to see it for themselves. Every cup of coffee poured went towards something bigger: scholarships for single parents, microgrants for struggling small-town business owners, and funding for Leo's educational foundation for young inventors. It wasn't the money that changed things. It was what the money represented: legacy without greed, history reborn in hope. One evening, long after closing, Sarah sat alone at one of the corner tables, the watch open in front of her. Inside the lid, she found something she had never noticed before: a tiny fold of paper hidden beneath the mechanism. Her breath caught as she carefully unfolded it. It was a letter, handwritten in the same steady, deliberate script she had come to know so well. If you are reading this, then the world has shifted in the way I prayed it would. My fortune was never built for wealth's sake. It was a safeguard for those I loved and for those who would come after. I leave it now, not as a prize, but as a challenge. Guard it as you would guard your child's future. Grow it, but never let it own you. And when the time comes, pass it on.
not to the one who asks for it, but to the one who needs it. Her eyes blurred with tears. For the first time, she didn't feel forgotten. She felt seen, completely, profoundly seen. The following spring, Leo stood on stage at a Youth Innovation Expo. A crowd of investors and scientists watching as he presented his project, an energy-efficient circuit that could revolutionize small-scale power storage. He spoke with the confidence of someone who knew where he came from and where he was going. In the front row, Sarah watched with quiet pride, the old watch ticking softly in her hand. After the applause, he ran down the steps and threw his arms around her. "Guess what?" he said breathlessly. "They offered me a fellowship, full ride." She laughed through tears. "Of course they did." He smiled. "You think Grandpa Elias would be proud?" She looked at him, eyes warm. "He already is, and so am I." Years passed. The diner became more than a place to eat. It became a symbol. A woman who had been handed nothing but rust had turned it into gold. But Sarah never forgot where it started. The watch stayed on her nightstand, ticking faithfully, its hands still slightly misaligned, its surface still scratched. She never repaired those flaws. She said they were reminders, that perfection wasn't the point. Redemption was. Sometimes, when the wind rattled the windows late at night, she could almost hear her grandfather's voice. "Keep what is built, guard what is owed." And she would whisper back, "I am."
Years later, long after the story had become local legend, a journalist asked her what the secret really was. The secret of the watch, the money, the dynasty. She smiled, turning the old timepiece once more in her hand. "There was never a secret," she said. "There was only a choice." "A choice?" the reporter asked. "Yes, to see value in what the world calls worthless. To believe that time doesn't erase love. It only hides it, waiting for someone to look close enough." She looked out the diner window then, at the afternoon light spilling across the counter, at the photo of her son shaking hands with the president after winning an award for innovation, at the faces of her employees, women who once struggled like she did, laughing, living, free. Then she closed the watch and smiled. "It all started with a rusty watch," she said softly, "and the courage to open it." That night, the diner closed late. The last light clicked off. The watch on the counter ticked quietly in the dark. Its hands glowed faintly, steady and sure. The sound echoed through the quiet room, soft, rhythmic, eternal. Tick. Guard what is owed. Tick. Keep what is built. Tick. Time doesn't just pass, it remembers. And somewhere, in that small-town diner that once smelled of struggle and hope, legacy itself kept time. Sometimes, the things we inherit aren't gold or land or names carved into marble. Sometimes they're rusted, forgotten, nearly thrown away. But maybe that's what makes them powerful. Because what's broken has a way of finding those strong enough to fix it. Sarah didn't just unlock a fortune. She unlocked time itself. The years her family lost, the love that silence buried, the promise that waited to be believed in again. And maybe that's the real inheritance we're all waiting for. Not money, not legacy, but understanding. Because every life leaves behind a clue, a lesson disguised as something ordinary. And when we finally stop running long enough to see it for what it is, we realize we've been carrying the key all along.
If this story stayed with you tonight, let it. Take a breath, look around, and ask yourself, what have you inherited that's worth fixing? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I read every one. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, the ones that start small and end somewhere you never expected, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I have another story for you. One that begins not with a watch, but with a letter that was never meant to be found. Until then, keep the light on. And remember, time only forgets those who stopped listening.